professor and department head of the Department of Agriculture Economics and Economics at Montana State University. He holds a PhD and MS in economics from North Carolina State University and a BS in economics from St. Mary's College of California. His research explores agriculture technology, financial engineering, crop insurance, farm policy, and risk management. In the classroom, Eric teaches courses on agriculture policy, financial engineering, and agriculture marketing. He has directed more than $4 million in federally funded interdisciplinary projects, ranging from the development of online risk management tools and weather-based agriculture policy programs to research on biodegradable mulches and the economics of organic labeling. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Blasley.
All right, thank you everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to see some familiar faces and meet a lot of new people. People I see usually in Bozeman come into our events. And I am a professor at Montana State. I'm in the Ag Econ department. I've been there since 2011. I've taught, right now I'm teaching ag policy, which is an interesting class to be teaching right now. We normally spend about a week on international trade. And in fact, before I took the class over, they didn't even cover international trade because we had an international trade class. But this year, it comes up non-stop. So we cover it for a couple weeks, but then still, show up to class on Thursday. We're talking about what's happening to soybeans. What does that all mean? So I've learned a lot this year, and I think that kind of motivated this talk a little bit. The title might be a bit confusing. Since I've gotten to, really since I've been doing research, I've focused on risk management. And if we think about agriculture, primary risk management, if you're in crop production, is crop insurance. So you guys probably heard the name or the title of like teaching classes in financial engineering. That's what that is. It's like how those products are written. That's one of many things that kind of something to do in financial engineering. So focusing on that, and really a lot of the risk management tools that we think of within agriculture are, really, when you put that seed in the ground, you don't quite know what it's going to be worth, when you take it out. And so a lot of the risk management tools are focused on that time period. So from planting to harvest. So you think about like crop insurance. You sign up for your policy a little before planting, and then it goes to harvesting. And so one of the things that struck me just under the current environment is just that this kind of uncertainty looks a little bit different. Price uncertainty is not new to agriculture. It's always been there. In fact, some of the oldest tools around were developed to mitigate price risk. Futures, options markets, those things came because of agricultural producers wanting to transfer risk to somebody who wanted it. Right? The example I always use, if you take one of my classes, is the dentist in Minnesota wants the risk, and the farmer has enough risk already, so they're going to transfer it over. So you have all these markets that are there to help manage risk, but kind of the trade volatility, I think, enters kind of a new. It's been a challenge this year, and so I don't think I have all the answers. In fact, I probably have more questions than answers. So that's my disclaimer at the beginning of the talk. I guess just the other plug I'll say is that I'm also the department head. I've been department head for a couple years now, and so if there is something that the Department of Agricultural Economics and Economics, some way that we can be of help. You're looking for, some insight on a particular topic, or if, your kid is interested in going to MSU and wants to talk to someone in the College of Ag, feel free to send them my way. So, yeah, I kind of introduced my talk a little bit there. Just the general outline of the talk. First is just kind of a basic market update. Like, where are we in the market? And then kind of mix that into some trade environment and look at just, what sort of trade arrangements are having an impact on some of those market conditions. And I would have said, if this were like a couple of weeks ago, I said, well, actually we're pretty insulated from a lot of the big kind of trade stuff. And then, stuff happened to beef, and that kind of changed it a bit. So, it's hard to escape some of the trade, tensions right now in agriculture.
Yeah.
Just a quick review of risk management tools, and then just talk about how those two things interact a bit. So, ag economists always start with the futures market. Why do we start with the futures market? It just gives us insight into what people with money in the market think. So, as an ag economist, there are plenty of ag economists that will come out with their own forecasts. My guess is this would probably be better than any forecast I could come up with. So, but what it does tell us is kind of what are the near and far term expectations. And I don't know if this is going to be big enough for many of you to see back there. Wheat prices are, I guess in economics, we would say they are at or around the break-even price right now. Like nobody's making money in that area. And prices in the long term, they tend to kind of break towards what we call the break-even price. And if you take an entry econ class, what you'll learn is that if you get into a market, let's say that has great prices, right? Market that where it's not $5.50 wheat, it's like $12 wheat. What happens? There's more wheat that is produced, and then that response brings down the price. So it always brings it back. Or conversely, you have, let's say, $3 wheat, right? $3 wheat would drive a lot of people out of business. And then that reduction to supply would then prop back up the price. So you have this kind of equilibrium at kind of that break-even price. And that's kind of really where we are now, is kind of right at that break-even price. Next year, at least on the Minneapolis exchange, it does seem like expectations are a little better, 630 wheat. So a little bit of strength there. We see that on the winter wheat as well, a little bit higher next year than this year. Cattle side, so cattle prices are obviously a lot better, right? They've been doing pretty well. They've actually been doing well for a while now. We're in one of the longer kind of upside price environments that we've seen in a while in the cattle market. And I'll show you guys later, but whenever we see prices as good as they are right now, they usually retract very quickly. And they've kind of stuck around for a while. So I actually think some of the skittishness in the market, like when they announced that Argentinian beef thing, the economist side of me said, well, that's not really a whole lot. It's probably not enough to really move the market, but it did move the market. And I think a lot of ranchers are probably looking at that, like just kind of waiting for that, that price to come down, and it will come down eventually. We don't quite know when. I think the timing of it is really, what we don't know. But I'd say for the first time, we're starting to see some downside pressure in the out futures contracts. So, January 26, feeder cattle at 334, September 26, so next fall, they're at 322. So it's not a dramatic drop, but it's some expectation that those prices are maybe going to start to come down. Which, maybe in that is to suggest that maybe there has been some rebuilding going on. And maybe with the next inventory report, maybe we'll see that. I don't know. I think really the only thing that's going to drive prices down is, increases in inventory. And we haven't really seen that yet. Live cattle, 231 in December, and then 216 December 26. So again, kind of some downside expectations there. The other thing I'll mention, it's not really on here, is that as you look at the cattle market, it's really the calf market that is experiencing the largest gains right now. And when you look at kind of the different cattle markets, the calf market does tend to be the most sensitive, the most volatile. It's going to get the biggest movements. And so, prices right now are great if you're seeing like over $4, but you know, that is a pretty erratic price series, so be careful there. Okay, cash receipts. So this is just to kind of give us a review. What do we do in Montana? You know, it's a lot of wheat and cattle. So last year, wheat was at 23% of total cash receipts. Livestock was obviously a little bit higher with those higher prices. And it might be a little bit easier to see here. We can look back to 2016, kind of the breakdown between government payments is up there in the red part, and then in the kind of yellow, I guess, is livestock revenues, and then crops. So crops is usually around 50% of total revenues. It was down a little bit this year, or in 2024. My guess would be that it would be a little bit lower there. So livestock is usually around, it's averaged 41% of total revenues. It was 50% 24. It'll probably be a little bit higher this year. And notice government payments, you know, pretty small proportion. I don't know, there was some uncertainty about what that was going to look like this year. My guess is it's going to be pretty small again this year. We had a lot of talks in my ag policy classes. Will there be a new market facilitation type of program implemented? And I think the students felt pretty confident in that until China said they were going to start buying soybeans, and then maybe not, but you know, we'll see. We'll see. Will that actually happen? There's uncertainty in new and exciting ways, I think, this year. So for wheat prices, again, that's what we primarily focus on. You know, there's a lot of variation here. These are all in real terms going back to 2000, and obviously you can see where we are now. We haven't been much lower. That's the good news. We've been higher. We haven't been much lower. And it's kind of across the board. So spring wheat, winter wheat, barley are all kind of seeing that, low price right now. And then yields, the one thing that I think we can forget with all this uncertainty is that, yield uncertainty is still the biggest concern, by most farmers in Montana. And this is statewide. This is statewide yields, which you can see how much they deviate. They're all normalized to their average, so they're not actually on the same scale. But, obviously you can see if we're thinking about risk management, traditionally, the price uncertainty, well, you can figure that out, right? You either, you have a contract, or maybe you go to the futures and options market. Like, there are tools out there for that. For a long time, there wasn't really something for yields. Now we have crop insurance. Crop insurance does a pretty good job of guarding against those yield fluctuations. And that hasn't gone away, certainly. And just looking at the drought monitor, so this is, I don't know, I probably pay way too much attention to that. You guys probably do too, but I'm a professor. I don't know why I watch the drought monitor. I don't have any money at stake, but yeah, drought is there, right? It's there, and it's back. Yeah, well, they never, I feel like in Montana, so one thing I've learned is that you've got to be careful when you're talking about drought, because you could be out there and saying like, well, that drought's over, and then there's someone in the back of the room who's like, just hit my area, right? But in the U.S., I guess the one thing I would say is, the reason I've been paying so much attention to it is just on the cattle side, thinking about rebuilding. The one thing you need good prices, but then you also need good weather. And I think the one thing that stopped a lot of rebuilding is you've had good prices, but you just haven't had good weather. In kind of the, I don't want to say, in the places where you have big cattle populations, so Texas, Oklahoma, those places start clearing out. You can see, potential rebuilding down there. A lot of the Mountain West, it's just kind of going around, down the Rocky Mountains there. A lot of the upper Midwest looks pretty good. Maybe you can see some rebuilding out there. We're not necessarily looking for rebuilding. We don't want rebuilding necessarily, right? We probably like high prices, but at the same time, I think this could show that there's some potential there. But there's a long history of research on livestock rebuilding, and it goes back, probably the most research was done in the 80s when they were starting to look at, these cattle cycles and rebuilding. And the real difficulty is it's this kind of 2-year projection, right? Of like, okay, I'm gonna rebuild now, and then down the road it's gonna be good. And so for a long time it was, well, prices look good, but weather's not good, I can't do it now. And here I think you have a situation where weather probably looks good in a lot of the country, but I think there's a lot of skittishness around prices. I think people are looking at what are prices going to be 2 years from now. They might not be as strong as today. And so just to zoom in on Montana, I mean, yeah, it's hitting somewhere everywhere, right? Almost everywhere. Even Gallatin County has a little bit of a drought there. But yeah, a lot of weather risk. Okay. So I've been talking about cattle inventory and prices, and again, it's as we talk about our two different commodities, I think with our grains, we rely on export markets. Montana has established itself as being very good at selling bulk commodities. I think there's a lot of investments to try to change some of that, to diversify a little bit. I know at MSU we're investing in more value-added enterprises in Montana with the hopes of, less kind of bulk exports and trying to sell more, in the state for a higher value. But for livestock, it's really a domestic market. There are some international, obviously, influences, right? So we're talking about, that 10 to 20% that we export, that 10 to 20% that we import, and then the rest is, coming from here. And so here, this plot shows, I can take this off here. Yeah, there we go. So what it shows, this dotted line is the calf price, and you can see it's over $4 a pound right now, which is the highest it's been, even as you go back to 2015. Really, you got to go back to the 70s to get a higher real calf price than that. And then looking at inventory, so we had Montana inventory in blue, and then U.S. inventory in kind of orange, and both of them have been following a similar projection. But I think what's important to look at is, the cattle cycle story is really told by the interaction of inventory and prices. So as inventory goes up, prices go down. As prices go up, inventory goes down. We see that response. Sometimes it's a delayed response. We saw it in, if you want to go to like the 90s was a little bit different, where we saw really low prices, but again, higher inventory. But if you look to 2015, really high prices, low inventory, and then kind of coming back. So those price signals are important for that inventory rebuilding, is kind of what this shows. And there's a lagged effect. So with a lot of the studies that they have started doing back in the 80s, the name like Oscar Burt, who's an old MSU professor, there's this delayed response that's probably 2 years before you see that impact on inventory. But so where we are now, if we look at the other periods where we saw really high calf prices, almost every time we've seen increases in inventory. We've seen kind of that orange line peak up, right following it, probably the year after or 2 years after. So I think that's the expectation, is that we would see some inventory rebuilding after this. Just to zoom in on the last 15 years, and I think it's important just to put into context like 2015. That's probably the most current, I guess, price spike that we can remember. Where we had that spike, we saw some inventory increases, not fast, right, but some slow inventory increases, and then prices drop pretty quickly. The thing I'll point out there is that was over 2 years. That 2 years we saw that price. And if you look at where we are now, this is like a 3 to 4 year project of those prices just steadily going up and up. And these are averaged annually, but they've certainly been going up. So again, kind of speaking to that relationship between inventories and prices. And just kind of keeping in context here, so when we're thinking about this market, what are kind of the risks? And we haven't even started talking about international trade yet, right? We haven't started talking about like Argentina and what that impact is. This is just the domestic kind of situation here. Clearly, price risk is a big one to be looking at in the next year. So let's talk about the trade environment. Obviously, we rely on these export markets. We're a global competitor. Here are some of our competitors in terms of production, right? And this might be a little less valuable than just looking at who are our competitors. And I think it's just important to think, these countries are not, every one of these countries wants to expand their market share, right? Every one of these countries wants to be selling more wheat to Japan. They want to send more wheat to different countries overseas. Russia, obviously a huge player. Canada in 23 had more wheat exports than we did. Australia, all these countries, and I think that's important to stress in all these kind of trade uncertainties is that this is a competitive market. When I take this trip overseas every year or so. We take students and we talk to buyers of Montana products. Last year we went to Japan. We went and talked to some grain buyers, beef buyers, and they said price is obviously important, but the other important part of that is reliability, right? When that country can't deliver it, can you deliver it every year? And if we need more, can you deliver that extra volume? So consistency becomes an important thing with all these countries. Where are our products going? And I think, remember, this is 23. So thinking about this is where our products are going, and then just within the current trade context, Philippines, Japan, South Korea, I think, have been in somewhat of a bubble. Like, we've protected those industries. They even had Montana had a pretty big trade delegation go out, to South Korea and Japan, probably selling, beef and wheat, I'm assuming, out there. But those markets still seem pretty good. Those are our biggest buyers. But then, you do see China down there. You do see Mexico, which, is kind of coming up more and more in the current news. Okay. And we'll kind of come back to the wheat side. Skipping over to the cattle side. This is a chart. So this is produced by the Economic Research Service at the USDA. And what I find interesting here is just the relationship between imports and production. And so the idea here is when our production is low, imports are high, right? Again, there's that negative relationship between the two and vice versa, right? So 2015, low production, high imports. And what do we see domestically when we have low production? We usually see those high prices, right? So high prices, and that by itself, like it's not just, so low production, if you're thinking about the US consumer, they're going to consume a fixed amount of beef. They've been pretty consistent over the years in their demand. And if our production goes down, then they need to get it from somewhere else. The other way to think of it is if our production goes down, it becomes more expensive relative to some of these other places, right? So these countries, find it a little easier to sell their product in the U.S. when ours is more expensive. So, consumers can be pretty, some consumers, right? You have different consumers, some can be pretty price sensitive. And they'll look for those markets, they're just looking at price, right? So they'll see a cheaper substitute. And so that's where the imports come in. But there is this kind of negative relationship there. The other interesting thing about this, so they do these long-term projections at the USDA. This one here, this was in February of 25, and this goes through 2034. But you'll see that the projection for that import, so imports are really high relative to exports. That's expected to shrink. If you look historically, they've been kind of pretty close to one another, and they project production to increase. I don't know if that's coming from inventory or where that's coming from, but they are projecting some pretty big jumps in production. So again, trying to think about risk management, not just in terms of like the next year, but the longer term projections. All right, this might be too small, but the basic, this is our tariff rate quota program, right? Imported beef has some limits on what we can bring in from these different countries. The big one that kind of came up recently was Argentina, so it had this 20,000 metric ton limit. I don't know if that's actually changed or not. I've heard that it's supposed to go to 80,000, but again, I don't know if that's an actual policy or just speculation or what that is. But we do have these TRQs on our main importers. Who's not listed on here are obviously Mexico and Canada. Those two we can trade freely with the USMCA. But then our bigger trading partners, Australia and New Zealand, obviously have much bigger tariff rate quotas. And, you guys might already know this, but the way that these work is, so like for Argentina, 20,000, says you can import the first 20,000 metric tons, pretty low tariff, on it. But then after that, it goes up substantially. And so the idea is to kind of limit to these amounts, and there's a couple of reasons for that. You don't want countries to just be dumping product on the U.S., right? You don't want, like let's say the U.S. couldn't sell a bunch of soybeans this year to China. What it might want to do is just say, well, could we just sell all this to some country and get it out of our bins so that next year we can actually make some money, right? That could be one way you do it. That would probably be bad for that other economy, though. So we have these TRQs, tariff rate quotas, to in a sense kind of prevent some of that from happening. The other notable is this other category, which, the one player on here that's not listed is Brazil. Brazil all fits under this other category. I don't quite know why they don't have their own category, why it still fits under other, but maybe there's a reason for that. So this was as of September 2025, and a lot of these have already been filled, right? We saw the import numbers for this year. Imports are really high this year. So a lot of these tariff quota levels have already been fulfilled, meaning they could continue to send us product, but it's going to be at a much higher price. It's going to be tariffed at a much higher level. All except for Argentina. So as of September 1, they were at 57% of their tariff rate quota. So, if you're talking 80,000, they've got a ways to go there. And I guess just the one thing from the price risk management side to think about here is, why do we have these here, right? If you're a producer in the U.S., if you are, prices are good, and if it is the case that when prices are good, you're just going to import a bunch of beef, what is that going to do to the price, right? It's going to bring it down pretty fast. And so, in some ways, what this does is it allows for some stability in those prices. All right, so where is this U.S. beef coming from? So these are imports into the U.S., and what I want to look at is 2020 to 2024, some of the big trading partners. And again, thinking about Mexico, 18%, comparing that to what it is so far in 2025. So Mexico's gone from 18% to 11%, so a lot less imported beef from Mexico. And again, that's not like live animals, right? We're talking about beef products here. Could be tariff related, I'm guessing, right? We haven't had the best relations with Canada and Mexico. Canada's gone from 26% to about 16%. Australia's a little bit higher, they're up to 21% this year from 18. Brazil though, Brazil's been the one that's really increased a lot this year. They averaged 12%, 2020 to 2024, and now they're almost 24%, right? So they picked up a lot of the room there. Argentina's pretty small. So far this year, year to date, 2%, and they haven't really changed in those 2 time periods. The other one that has really come up, well, Uruguay has come up a little bit. Paraguay, so a lot of kind of South American suppliers of beef have kind of entered into this import game with the U.S.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So it says 2020 to 24 averaged 3.69 billion.
Yep.
And then the other one says 3.4 to 25.
Year to date.
Okay.
Yeah, year to date, so like half the year. 3.4 billion, yeah. So it's going to be a lot higher this year than we've averaged in the 4 years prior. Yeah.
That's not over 4 years on the total.
No, so yeah, that's that
3.69 per year.
Yeah, per year. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, per year. Yeah, so we're almost there this year, 7 months into the year. Yeah. And but the shares have changed a bit this year. Any other questions before I?
I was really hoping it wasn't 3.4 versus 4 years.
Yeah.
I know it's going up, but I was hoping it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we go back to, we can see these imports kind of where they are now. I mean, you look back to 2020, and they're a lot higher this year. Okay, so beef exports. This is the trade. I mean, if we're talking about exports, I mean, this is a little less important, so I won't spend too much time on this. I think the big thing here is, Japan and South Korea, they've been big trading partners for a long time. They still are. Canada, Mexico, much smaller players. We're exporting a lot less to those countries this year. And as you can see, so this is average 3.19 billion over that 4 years. This year, we're at 1.6. So we're likely going to be down in exports. And again, if you go back to this slide, we can see that we're below normal for exports. All right, so what is the role that these international markets play? And I think really the primary area of risk where this enters into the equation is, for us, is in prices. So we can see, like with feeder cattle futures, some pretty big adjustments. So 378 as of October 16th, and then down to 334. I think that's about where we are now. It's like 334. So I mean, that's a 40-cent drop right there. I mean, that's in a couple of weeks. And not to say that there wasn't a whole lot of growth in there. In fact, we can go to one where there was a lot of growth. Soybeans. This is one that we talked about in my ag policy class the other day. But soybeans, you'll notice, I mean, they've been up and down all summer, right? Is China going to buy or are they not? Are they going to, or are they not? So at some point, it's not really based on fundamentals anymore, right? It's speculation of the fundamentals. And if you take these, a class at MSU, and you're like, well, what's the expected price when you have uncertainty? Then you kind of hedge it a little bit, right? It's hedged down if you don't quite know for sure. Even at $11, that's really not where soybeans was, a year ago, 2 years ago. The other interesting thing that we saw was, so my class, we were looking at this on Thursday, soybean futures for this winter, they jumped up, as you see there. But if you look at some of the futures for next fall, next winter, they really haven't moved off of where they were before. So the idea being, again, introducing uncertainty into the market when you're talking about a 1-year deal, let's reevaluate it in a year, what does that mean for next year? What kind of assurances do we have? And that, I mean, we could experience price movements for a whole range of reasons, right? This is just kind of on top of all that stuff. So,
Eric,
yes,
so when you're looking at an export market
Yep.
like this, isn't it important to know how much our customer has bought already of that product? Are you getting to this in your presentation?
you mean like within
Because
the
if
current
you look
year?
at what China has already purchased in soybeans,
Mhm.
they're ahead, way ahead of their purchasing of soybeans. They just got it from other countries.
Sure.
And so even if there was some sort of opening of them, they've already filled their needs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so that would be the slide that would be great in here, but that's a great point, right? So let's say, okay, let's open up the China market. They're not gonna be buying the same levels they were buying last year, right? Because they're not waiting till the last minute to go over and get that. And, the other thing too is, we've seen, in the last few years, big investments in South America from China. So, the risk factor that might not be in here, it might be a little harder to really put your finger on, is kind of the longer term effects of trade disruptions. And the one that I go back to, we've been talking a lot about beef, and there was 1 year when I was in class, and I mentioned BSE in class. And the students were like, what's that? I realized I just dated myself. And then I was like, it was, mid-90s. And they're like, we weren't born yet, I'm sorry. But the point is, right, what happened there is there were export markets that shut down to the U.S. And take Japan as an example. Then they slowly started reintroducing it. And it took like a good 20 years to get back to where we were. And that wasn't even like any, I don't know, maybe it was something we did, maybe it wasn't, right? But it was a trade disruption that has these, long-term consequences. So that's a little harder to really identify, but yeah, to your point of, we're in this global market, and there's no reason that people need to wait for us to start trading with them, absolutely. And that's probably the same for beef too, right? So, take Argentina for example. Let's say, okay, let's have Argentina send more beef into the U.S. Well, they're already sending, beef to places like China and other, like they have their trading partners. So the idea that, you can just snap your fingers isn't realistic. Any other questions? Yeah.
I had to step out for a little bit, but have you shown any slides that show consumption rates in the United States for beef per capita?
Yeah, no, but I can say that consumption rates have been pretty steady in the U.S.
The reason I'm asking is that, beef prices get so high that they'll migrate away from beef to other protein sources,
Yep.
and maybe we don't get them back.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good point. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about, you look at who consumes beef, like not just total production, but who consumes beef, and you look at younger consumers consume less beef, and so, if you don't catch them, right, you just lose them. I don't know. I think demand, even in spite of high prices, has been pretty stable, at least in the U.S. But there are those opportunities to substitute to other products. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, Eric, you've been using the collective pronoun we are selling, we are importing. I don't ever remember exporting beef to this.
Yeah.
So who actually is doing this, and what is their economy?
Who are the exporters? Is that what you're asking?
Who are the exporters,
Yeah.
who are the importers?
That's a very good question. I don't know who let you in the front of the room, but yeah. So those are very different. So we, the U.S. producer, and to your point, there's segmentation, right? There are most ranchers are selling to U.S. consumers. Who's selling out of country? Yeah, somebody else, I guess. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. But. Other questions?
Shouldn't that be tracked? You know, we're looking at the overall effect of supply and demand.
Yeah.
Right? But there's also various monopoly risks going on. Right? And when I started ranching, us ranchers were getting over 70% of the consumer dollar.
Sure.
And now we're under 40. But where did that go? And doesn't that mean something?
Yeah. So the economic answer, I mean, that is something, that part they do track. They did, yeah. Not right now, but yeah. But yeah, to your point of, yeah, so people talk about beef prices going up, but at the same time, there's less that's going back to the rancher, which is absolutely true. I think the studies, or at least the data from ERS, and I haven't seen it in the last few years, but you know, it's those intermediate labor, retail, marketing, all those. And I mean, the retail side would kind of fit into, I think, the other players in the market, right? I think what you're alluding to there.
But why? If it's supply and demand that controls everything, why?
Well, I can tell you why at least workers cost more, and why moving product costs more. Margins, I don't have a good answer for, right? But I think
Building their weddings cost more too.
sure. Yeah. All right. Other questions? Okay. All right. Yeah, but I guess to that point too is, you know, these export actions do impact the domestic market as well. Even though you're not a participant, even though you're not exporting your product, it still does impact what you see. What I wanted to try to get into is just kind of a review of some of the risk management tools within the context of what we've been talking about. And so I mentioned crop insurance earlier. Crop insurance you could think of as, you know, a lot of our products are revenue. So one thought was, well, yeah, you know, this should hypothetically cover both price drops or yield drops. And so look at Montana. So this is data going back to 1995. They have this cause of loss data set where you can look at, you know, indemnities were paid out, what was the root cause of that? And, you know, obviously the main suspects you're going to probably know: drought, 50% of the indemnities due to drought, 18% due to hail, 8% due to heat, which sounds kind of like drought, but I guess it could be a little different. But the important one, I think, is decline in price, 2%. Right? So 2% of the indemnities that are paid under Montana crop insurance policies are because of declines in prices. Point being, it's probably not a great price risk management tool. Right? Now, some of this could be if farmers are buying yield insurance, it's not going to cover that. 2000, yeah. And so, yeah. So if you look nationally, so like Midwest is the one where you have a lot of revenue policies. This would be 4%. It's a little bit hard. Yeah, Doug, to your point though, like instead of 95, maybe you looked like the last 15 years. See if that, yeah, if that goes up. Yeah. But so it could be a bit higher. My guess is it's still probably below 5% in there. And that was just one thing I was looking at is, well, can crop insurance be used as a way to mitigate some of that trade uncertainty that could result in prices? And maybe not, right? Because we've seen some price drops that haven't quite triggered payments. It could. looking at loss ratios, I think a lot of these payments, so when you see the high loss ratios, those are years when high rates of indemnities were paid out, and most of those are going to be because of drought. Right? Those are drought payments, 21, 22, 2017. So those are kind of the main 4 products there. The one interesting one here is this green one, which is pasture, rangeland, forage. That's one that I'll talk about a little bit. That's grown quite a bit, especially on the RMA's book of business. It's sort of taking over. Like it's kind of becoming their growth. In fact, here's kind of a graph that shows acreage that are insured. You can see the red. The red looks pretty flat since like the mid-90s. And then you see this blue just growth. That's all forage. That's all mostly pasture rangeland forage, right? These big policies. And now more than half of the acres in the program are from forage crops, which changes dramatically kind of the business that they're doing. They're not selling, these aren't revenue policies, these are weather index products. So I guess the one question to ask is, well, is this a meaningful way to then manage risk? And I think there's really 2 products to think of, right? So we have PRF, which is here, the drought risk, which doesn't go away. And then LRP is another one, livestock risk protection, which is a price, kind of where you can create a price floor. When I taught futures and options, we talked a lot about put options. That's kind of basically what you can think of that as being. Like you establish a price floor, and then if the price falls below it, then you start receiving payments to offset those losses. But here, so for PRF, as far as drought's concerned, the premiums are primarily above 1. You can see them trending. They're not really trending in any particular direction. But liability, so this is not acres, this is the amount of value production here. You can see it's been growing. So it's not just more acres being enrolled under this policy, but it's more value being protected there. And I moved here from Texas in 2011, and so I was in Lubbock, a lot of cattle feeding and things like that. Those guys knew all about insurance, futures and options. They used them pretty heavily, and the cattle sector wasn't really using them as much here, and so especially crop insurance, there wasn't really a program at all. So this is. For me, this is pretty noticeable to see that kind of change there. LRP is another one too. When we think of the primary risk in that trade scenario being price-based, being able to create a price floor could be pretty effective, especially when prices are pretty high, right? In some ways, it's easy to think of like a put option when prices are high. It's a little different when you're in the wheat. It's a little harder sell to say, well, do you want to create a price floor, at 5.20? It's a little harder of a sale, but the upside is if prices do go up, then you can still take advantage of that, right? There's no free lunch in economics, and there's no free lunch in futures and options either. So you have to pay a premium for that. But again, like the liability there has grown very quickly, 25, and I haven't seen the numbers for 26. My guess is it would be continuing upward given where prices are. Okay, so kind of our main risk management tools given that scenario, crop insurance, I would say mostly kind of yield protection with some price protection also. PLC, especially, you can think of, that's specifically supposed to be price protection. I think the prices probably aren't quite where people would like for them to be, but there's some at least price floor there. But then also kind of getting back to price is the big uncertainty. Then getting back to some of our traditional hedging strategies, forward contracting, futures contracts, options contracts. options using a put option to then allow, if prices do improve, to take advantage of that. Okay, and let's see. This is one, you know, when I first thought of the outline for this talk, I thought, oh boy, I'd have more to say when I got here. But like I said, I have more questions than I have answers for today. But I think the big just summary is a lot of the risk management tools that we currently have in our pocket that we're familiar with, they do deal with these kind of short-term movements. So how do you deal with these kind of longer-term risks, these geopolitical risks? Like maybe that international market that we've been selling to doesn't come back, right? Maybe we need to find a different market. So market diversification, really important. Selling into different markets. How are we marketing our product? Who are our buyers? Portfolio diversification. Again, just trying to keep things, not putting all of our eggs in one basket, trying to sell across a range of things. Traditional weather risks still apply, so monitoring all of those things. And then expansion into new and developing markets. I think that's kind of the name of the game going forward. In the short term, obviously, we talked about weather risks still applying. So just, I think I'm short on time here, but, you know, I think the main thing is there are really limited tools that we have in kind of this current environment. One of the things that, at least from a, you know, from a business perspective, anytime, this is not just agriculture, this is kind of any business, when you're in a low price environment, you know, they always say focus on your costs, because really, like, that's the only thing you have any control over, right? Are your costs. So really, you should always be focused on your costs, but in a low cost environment or low price environment, it's harder to get away if you don't have your costs under control. Just to increase value and diversification, and then, you know, with cattle prices moving, I mean, they've got to come down. Like we were talking at the beginning, wheat prices are at that break-even price. Cattle prices are above the break-even. So if they're above, they've got to be, you know, coming down. We just don't know when or how quickly. One just last pitch that I'll make, and I want to thank the Montana Farmers Union for coming to our conference, supporting our conference. It's a great time for us to engage with you, and so I hope that you'll make it there. We have a lot of new faculty. If you haven't been on campus in a while, a lot of those new faculty are going to be presenting interesting you know, research that they're doing on a whole range of issues. So I hope to see you there next Friday. It's a whole big Celebrate Ag Week next week on campus, so it's going to be pretty cool. They bring tractors, park them right on campus. We have Wheat Montana coming and stuffing our students' faces with cinnamon rolls on Monday morning. It's going to be great. So with that, I will conclude and welcome any questions or comments you guys have.
So Eric,
Yeah, well,
you said that you're doing a farm policy class. That's great. And so I have a suggestion for a policy to kind of explore for farm policy. And it would be a program where you would establish a target price for, let's just use wheat. And so we establish a target price that's about the cost of production right now, say around $6 a bushel.
okay.
And so then, if the target price, if the real price falls below that target price, you know, goes to like $4.50. To have that put into reserve surplus, to where the government would put it in and give you a loan, the farmer a loan, so that they could pay their bills and maybe see it through for like a 2-year loan, maybe even a 3-year loan, and leave that commodity in the bin until maybe that next drought that we have and the prices start going back up. Then they can pay off their loan and then sell that wheat at a profit. And then now we have another option for those reserves, and that's because now we have the ability to make biofuels. government could put it into the biofuel program and produce fuel, which we need. And then that would establish a more consistent price. And it would also establish a more consistent supply, so we don't have shortages that risk starving our nation. And it really, in that situation, I believe it benefits the farmers a whole lot more, and it benefits the consumers a whole lot more. When you if you don't have those reserves, and you don't have a target price that's realistic, then we're just at the mercy, really, of the corporate monopolies, who are the ones who can take advantage of those high prices, low prices, high reserves, low reserves, and it kind of takes and switches the control and the power to the producers away from the corporate monopolies. Have you ever heard of a policy like this before?
Maybe, like sort of. I mean, so instead of like take PLC, but instead of compensatory payments, government is being loaned that product and perhaps creating some new like using new technologies to come out with new products. Is that? Do I understand
Well,
that right?
that's the extra thing to it.
Yeah.
But when my parents,
Yeah.
who farmed in the best years of U.S. agriculture, we had a commodity reserve program
Sure.
where if it didn't reach a target price, you could put that grain in a bin and take out a loan from the government. And if the price came back up above that target price, you could pay off the loan to the government and sell it into the marketplace.
Yeah.
And it did a lot of things. One, it forced the marketplace to pay a fair price for that crop, or they didn't get it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I would say during the 50s to 70s, there were some, I mean, I don't think it was exactly that, but yeah, where the government would buy product, the cheesecake in Kansas City. I have a canister actually in my office of peanut granules.
Yeah.
That was, I think, from a program similar to that. I think it was part of the food assistance program, though, this particular one, but I know they use it for different
Well,
things.
but then that's what they did. They used the surpluses to feed the people.
Yeah.
Well, on that thing, it's what, these crop insurance and market risk insurance is what, 65 or so percent subsidized? Who's being subsidized? Me or JBS?
Are you buying insurance?
But I mean, who's the actual beneficiary? And what is it that the taxpayer is paying for?
Yeah, so with the, let's see. I don't know if I'd follow you with like let's see. So, I mean, most of these are grain farmers, but we're talking about livestock products.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the rancher who's buying it, and it is a little different, right? Because it's not a payment; it's a discount. Yeah, the insurance. Yeah, well, so maybe that's your JBS.
Well, you know, I mean, what I see now, and what Walter was referring to, when we had pre-1996 foreign policy, where we were trying to maintain a supply that we actually needed instead of overproduction. So there used to be a market for wheat and corn and soybeans.
ways. I mean, I think insurance can create distortions, you know, moral hazard. I don't know how large it would be. I mean, I think for a lot of, if you look at LRP and PRF for that example, I would say what distinguishes them from maybe other insurance products where you might see producers change their behavior because they buy the insurance is that those particular products, it does not matter what you're doing on the ground. Like the PRF, you're buying it, and like let's say you invest in, you know, better ways to capture water, and a drought actually hits your area, but you still have good forage. You still get a payment under that program. It's not so the incentives. It might not be that way with, you know, depending upon how the policies are written on the grain side. But there's at least we call it incentive compatible, right?
The other day, last Tuesday, I drove off the Red Mill Road over mine, and I went through by a farm, and they were putting wheat into absolutely dry ground. They were putting wheat into absolutely dry ground. Now, maybe it rains this weekend or not will sprout, but, I mean, why were they doing that?
It could be moral hazard or optimism. Yeah, farmers are optimistic.
So Eric, I forgot one piece of that farm policy for your class to discuss.
Yeah,
And that was, in addition to having the reserves,
yeah.
in addition to having the target prices, having production controls. And that program that we had in place, that was good for the farmers and good for the consumers, cost the taxpayers virtually nothing. Virtually nothing.
So there's
And right now, the program that we have, where a lot of, it's more than 65%. Some of our crop insurance is subsidized by 80%. And there's no cap to that. So that means the Bill Gateses of the world are getting subsidies for their farms to the tune of 10, 15, $20 million of taxpayer money to cover their risk. And really the beneficiaries in that program are the insurance companies, because they're using taxpayer money to cover their risk. And the other beneficiary is to Jill's point, the corporate monopolies that get cheap commodities.
Yeah, well, the only thing I'll add to that is that I know we've talked about, you know, caps on insurance subsidies, you know, that are not there now, but, you know, that could be one way to at least limit the concentration of those benefits. Because we've talked about some of the research I've done where, I mean, there is considerable concentration of those benefits just because of how the program is designed. I don't think it's, well, I'm not going to say whether it's intentional or not, but it's just a result of how the program is developed. Higher yielding operations are going to, you know, receive higher amounts of subsidies. That's just, you know, how it goes. And we also know that larger farms are going to tend to purchase higher coverage levels, which is also going to lead to those higher rates. So, you know, to that point, I do think there are some things that could maybe be done to at least mitigate some of that, but I don't know. Next farm bill, right? Get that in there.
Yeah, 20 years from now.
Thank you so much for coming and enduring our rants and raves that are still really good conversation starters. And for this next generation of ag economists and ag producers, I think it's good to explore all those nuances and avenues. So we thank you so much for your time and thank you for being In the Center Mark room, we'll have some snacks and refreshments for this next, is it 20 minutes or so before we start our first policy session. Don't forget to stop by the networking table out there in the vendor table. So that's where all of our local producers across the state have put their business cards out and what they're producing and trying to sell direct to consumer, for example. So that's a good place for you to leave your own contact information as well for folks to get a hold of you. And again, we'll start our first policy session at 4 o'clock right here in